Good afternoon. My name is Lukáš Přibyl. I'm heading the Department of Public Diplomacy at the Czech Embassy in Washington, D.C. And it is my great pleasure to be able to introduce our guest for today's discussion, Naomi Patz. Naomi Patz is a very accomplished person, so I will, in order not to omit any of these accomplishments, I'll take the liberty of actually reading what she has done. She is the playwright and producer of The Last Cyclist. Naomi, with her husband, Rabbi Norman Patz, is currently working on a documentary about the film, which is tentatively called The Last Cyclist in Context. She has also created numerous one-act plays, scripts, and parodies on Jewish themes, and a cantata called A Word to the Wise. Naomi is the author of 7 books, as well as numerous essays, including monographs on 2 pre-World War II Czech Jewish communities in Dvůr Králové and Jihlava. Her career includes serving as director of the North American Jewish Forum for 8 years and national director of Partnership 2000, now Partners Together. She holds a BA in English Literature from Barnard College, an MA in English from Old Dominion University, and an MA from Hebrew Union College Jewish Institute of Religion, which awarded her an honorary doctorate in Jewish religious education in 2004. And as I just learned from Naomi a couple minutes ago, the film is already collecting awards at festivals, even though those festivals are currently, due to the situation, held online. Before we move to the discussion itself, I should say a few words about it. It will last for 1 hour. We will devote 45 minutes to a conversation, some questions that I will ask Naomi, and the last 15 minutes will be for additional questions from the attending audience. They can use the Q&A function and send us questions which I will then relay on to Naomi. As I mentioned, the session is recorded, so you can come back to it later. So one more thing I should say, that this discussion, we are holding it on the occasion of commemoration of the liberation of Auschwitz, Nazi death camp that I'm sure you have all heard about. I want to start about just saying very quickly about the film, that it's a reconstruction of a long lost play made, produced, acted out during the Holocaust in a concentration camp called Terezín, or Terezín, known as Terezínstadt Ghetto, not far from Prague. Can I ask you, were you involved in Holocaust issues, Holocaust research? How did you come across the topic? How did you hear about the existence of this play, and how did you go about discovering it, researching it, reconstructing it, and to some extent reinventing it?
Okay, excuse me. For many years, my husband and I have both been interested and involved in Holocaust studies. He much more so than I. He has taught it, but we did through primarily his work. We ended up traveling to a great many concentration camps. We went to all but one of the death camps in Poland. We went to holding camps, and there are so many, unbelievably many camps associated with what the Nazis did to gather and persecute Jews beyond what we first thought, that I began to learn about it, and read and took some courses, and maintained our interest. We have been going to Prague for many years, since the early 80s, and brought teenage groups and adult groups to Terezín, to to Jewish sites in Prague. And I mean, in fact, very early, actually, I shouldn't even start about this because this is a Terezín story, but it's a distraction story. But how I'm daughter of somebody who was very well known in Terezín years later, and the daughter was shocked to discover I had basically heard about Terezín, let alone knew about her mother. But this was during the communist era, when not all that many people from the West traveled to Prague or to Terezín.
And that's before the museum in Terezínstadt or Terezín was set up and so on. So it was just a garrison town full of soldiers.
And you could still see at the street corners, you would see the numbers of the barracks were on the walls. Those have all been painted out or erased. And it was a very different feeling place, a very unnerving place at the time. The only time later that we had a sense of that was many years later, when we actually stayed overnight in so I guess it's a youth hostel facility in the Magdeburg barracks. And it was a very strange experience to be there overnight with virtually no lights on in what's now a town. When we went the first time, and this is a distraction from talking about the cyclist film, but when we went there the first time, there were no civilians yet in the town. When we've gone back in more recent years, people have come back to their homes, which still seems extremely strange to us that anybody would want to live in a place which had become a gathering concentration camp, a place where so many people died during the Holocaust. In any case, based on all of these activities, we've had a strong interest. My husband is now retired, but he was for many, many years the congregation. And one of the activities that he was very pleased to have gotten for our synagogue was a weekend seminar for high school students in creative arts, which he devoted each year to the job of a different country. And this particular year, he decided to do of Czechoslovakia. This was 95. And with a focus primarily on Terezín. And because it was an arts program, he wanted to have a theater group put on a play. And he turned to me and showed me a book which is called Terezín. It was written in 1955, published by the Jewish communities of the Czech lands, Bohemia and Moravia. And there's one chapter in it, just happened to have a copy handed to me of the book. Let me see. I think there it is. Terezín. Turning into an audio-visual display. In any case, the book has chapters, many chapters devoted to the buildup, how the former garrison town was turned into a concentration camp, how people came to it, where they came from, the virtually starvation, rations, how the numbers of people in the camp, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And one section is on the cultural activities, and the chapter, a piece of the chapter called Theater and Cafe in Terezín. It was written by a woman named Jana Shedova. I knew nothing about her at the time.
And Terezín was really unique in that sense that there was a wide range of cultural activities held by the prisoners, and was also part of the Nazi plan to cover up their crimes, but just as a note to our listeners, there was actually theater in the concentration camp, as hard as it is to believe.
Theater and concerts and let's see, maybe we can get back to that a little bit further on. And by the way, I'm worried that I keep getting a note that says my internet connection is unstable. I've never seen that before, but I'm alerting you now. I have no idea what to do about it,
There's
but
nothing we can do about
continue.
it. So
Let's
let's hope that
continue.
it holds.
Absolutely, I agree. So in this section, in her chapter on theater and cabaret, she talks about in detail only one production, which was The Last Cyclist, and she gives a whole a plot. It's not the entire plot, of the primary parts of the plot, and she called it our most courageous production. And my husband said, can you do something with it from this plot summary? So I put together a small, mostly a narrator, and because how much can you do in a weekend, and a cast that would say yes, no. It was a cast, and it was a small, basically a small play. It was extremely well received. People were very, very moved by it, and in part, the conclusion of it, the chorus and the actors sang a song which became known as the Terezín anthem, or the Terezín hymn, which was written by the playwright. The original was a cabaret. It was written by Švenk, who was the playwright who wrote the cabaret. He directed it. He was the lead actor in it, and he wrote years earlier. I'm sorry. Yeah, well, actually, it was years earlier. It was 2 years earlier. He was. Let me go back up and say he was on the first transport that was sent from Prague of a number of young men who were picked up off the street and sent to turn this Austro-Hungarian garrison town, a walled town that was tailor-made, so to speak, to a concentration camp. And
that was still in 1941, the Arbeitskommando.
Absolutely. And they were the first group that went into the camp. After he got there, he put on his first cabaret, which was called The Lost Food Card. And can you imagine if somebody's putting on something that's called The Lost Food Card, how important having a food card to be able to show to get your meals had to be. And the concluding song, Cabaret, which became known as the Terezín hymn, and the Terezín March, had a wonderful. The stanzas were in a minor key. The chorus was in a major key, and the key thing of the lyrics it talks about soon we homeward bound, our lives will start again, and then it ends on the ruins of the ghetto we will laugh. So it talked about hope. It talked about getting out of there. It talked about life starting again. And it's important for our listeners to know that Terezín is only 40 miles from the very cultured city of Prague. The first people who were interned in Terezín were mostly Czech Jews, I think many of them probably from Prague. It seemed like something that was going to be temporary, even though this was already into the war and they're not already there. It had, for a long time, didn't have quite the sense of reality, and they were sure they'd be going home. So they were motivated by this song. So that takes us to there. Okay, and then I should then say, you asked me about where I basically from this 1995 small production. The play didn't go away from me. It just stayed. I was fascinated by it. I wanted to talk about it. I wanted to learn about Švenk. I wanted to know what happened. And I began looking. This was the internet. But if the internet had already, there still wouldn't have been anything, because nothing much was yet written about it. And I turned to one of our friends in Prague, a woman named Eugenia Shednova, her name I may not be pronounced correctly. but she knows who we are, and we've been good friends for a great many years. Who she was teaching at Charles University at the time, and she looked for a copy of the play, and she found me in the Library Theater Institute in Prague, in Czech, of course. It was a typescript copy. It was never a published copy. It was just, literally some, and it was there. And she was able to translate it for me, whose English was not perfect and was British English more than US English, which affected what I did later on, which we can talk about later. She emailed me the script. I looked at the script and I said, oh my God, this isn't the script I was looking for. This script, because the second half was totally different from Shedova's description in the in her chapter. And
we should mention that Jana Shedova was the only survivor from that original play in Terezín.
Right, which is what I learned as I went along. So I looked at this and I said, what am I going to do? And then first I thought maybe I will do a graphic novel, because I can all the different elements. I can do the plot line. I can say what should have been, what was, how Terezín was a camp where was a gathering place, where maybe I should say this now about Terezín, what made Terezín unique, that and why it was called a show camp or a model ghetto, was because certainly of the early people who were in Terezín were intellectuals, theater people, artists from Prague, and then some people from Germany, who were, all of them were well-to-do, that is, the artists weren't, the theater people weren't, but there were also very wealthy people who altogether would have been, had they been gone missing as a group, their absence would have been noted. And so they were allowed to do all sorts of things in Terezín that weren't allowed in the other camps, which is where we get the theater, the opera, the concerts, there were chamber music concerts, and even several performances of the Verdi Requiem, which I'm kind of jumbling things together, and I hope it's not confusing, but a wonderful film was made of the creation of how the Verdi Requiem was done in Prague. It's called the Defiant Requiem. And as it happens, one of the survivors who was interviewed for this film mentions the Last Cyclist and its importance to the prisoners in the discussions in the Defiant Requiem, which
Terezín also
right.
was sometimes called the city that the fear gave to the Jews,
Right.
because it was supposed to be, despite the hunger and deportations and omnipresent death, also a place to show off. And it actually, in the play and in the film, it's alluded to, there was or were rather visits by the Red Cross.
Right.
And the play talks about it with the food. Pretend that you're well fed and you've had too much to eat. So this was part of a charade to hide
Absolutely.
what was going on.
And one of the things the Nazis did for this, what we pronounce charade, I pronounce charade, you pronounce charade, is that they sent off to the death camps all the people they wanted to make. There had been, at its busiest, at its most crowded, the Terezín, which should have had a maximum of 5,000 people, had as many as 60,000 people. So they sent off the old, the infirm, the children. They sent them off to the death camps. They worked for months and months to prepare this charade for the Red Cross, and the Red Cross indeed was fooled, and the Red Cross in turn fooled the outside world, which made the whole situation much worse. But okay, so how did we jump to that now, and how do we get back?
Well, we were talking about Jana Shedova and how you realized that the play actually was different from the original Švenk's play that was performed in Theresienstadt, because there was a whole section of it which just didn't fit.
Right. Absolutely. Okay, so then let me take it from there. So that what I learned were another her film, her play was she was the only survivor, as far as we know, and she went to Prague after the war, where she was never in any other camp. She worked in Terezín with mica, which was considered a war necessity for the Germans, and so she was left there. And, she was able to stay there, and she went to Prague, where she entered the theater. She had never done any theater before she went to Terezín, but she really became her life. It became her salvation in the camp, and it became her life in Prague. And she acted in a great many plays, and later in her life in some films. But for the 17 years after she left the camp, until she managed to do so, she kept the Last Cyclist, which, as I said before, she called our most daring, our most courageous production. She kept it in her head. She wanted to perform it. But in those years, in communist era in Prague, in Czechoslovakia, the Holocaust was not talked about. Jews were not talked about. It was a non-subject. So it was very daring that when she and a colleague, Darek Vostrel, was the director of the avant-garde Rococo Theater in Prague, were invited to put on a production in honor of the 40th anniversary of the Czech Communist Party. She figured out with his assistance how to turn the story of The Last Cyclist into a play as in honor of the 40th anniversary, which meant that the second act was focused on the outreach of Czech communism to the countries in Africa and Asia, which they were trying to bring into the Czech communist orbit. And so they had to do things, the same characters stay, few of the things stay. There are different characters that are in there. Some of the things that I was able to focus, but I was able to compare outline that she had given us, she had given her audience from her book in 1905. In other words, she wrote the script 4 years before she wrote the chapter, but I came to it backwards. I came from the chapter later to the script, and I was able to compare the two. And I have to say that it took me. We should probably talk about soon about how I did. Excuse me. Excuse me. How I put my script, but one of the things I had to do, and this took me a long time to do, was to see what I could pull out and take away from the script that she added, from the script to which she and Voss added the communist materials for 1961 from what she had acted in 1944, Terezín.
But basically what you're saying is that she used the 1961 play to be able to introduce at least some of the themes and the fact that Jews were interned and deported to the audiences, because before that nothing had been spoken about in the communist times. So that was her way to remember Švenk.
Right, absolutely. Even though in a way that she did in, they didn't talk about being in the camp. They didn't talk about their problems. They didn't have to talk about that. What they wanted, and we can get to talking about humor and how it was a comedy from this, that they wanted to be taken out of themselves. They wanted to be diverted. They wanted to be entertained. And in 1961, where it's much more serious and conceivably problematic as a script, she doesn't say Jews, she doesn't say Terezín particularly, but it's known through it's sort of not mentioned, but yet mentioned. Implicitly. And the other thing is that in Czechoslovakia, after the Slansky trial in 1952, which was an anti-Jewish trial. Jews as a topic simply was forbidden. So that made it all the more complicated, but for her, all the more imperative that she find a way to get it shared. That's look, this was 17 years. It stayed in her head. And what she didn't have an original script. When Švenk, I can get back to talking about Švenk now. Švenk was in 1944, a number of months after the performed. And again, it was performed, and again, I say that there really was it was rehearsed in the camp. There were open rehearsals, and so as many people as could went to the rehearsals, but it was only formed officially once, because the Council of Elders, the Jewish self-government that was set up by the Nazis to take care of internal activities in the camp, when they saw the plot, they were terrified that the SS would understand, and the plot, I hope you have all seen the film, that the plot which pits bicycle riders, which everybody understood to mean the Jews, against lunatics, and lunatics were the Nazis. Imagine lunatics. So it was very, it was zany, it was slapstick, but once you understood that the lunatics were the Nazis, it also was in many ways problematic.
It was too explicit in a way.
Absolutely. And even though it was performed sort of sub rosa in the barracks by a few people who had been in the cast, who may have told the story over and over, somehow or another, everybody seemed to know it. And survivors mention it, even though not all that many people could have actually seen it. But a few months after that, Švenk was among a whole group of theater people and other performers who were sent on transport to the east, to Auschwitz. Now, this was the second time his name had been listed for deportation. The first time he gave his girlfriend all of his written materials, all of his works, but he ended up not being sent. This time, I don't know what he did. Either he took the materials with him or they got lost, but he was deported. The materials were lost. He was not sent to the gas chamber. But from when he went to Auschwitz, but he was sent from there to a subcamp of Mauthausen called, a subcamp of Buchenwald, which I called Muselwitz, where he and a number of of other people from Terezín went, and that was in late 44. He was there into 1940, into 45, shortly before the end of the war. He was really this person who had been so enthusiastic, so much personality in the camp, whose song about being in soon we will go home again had motivated so many people. His fellow inmates compared him to Charlie Chaplin or maybe to Buster Keaton. He was lively. He would tell jokes. He would do whatever. He just somehow he couldn't go on. He had no more energy. And when the Nazis evacuated people in the face of the oncoming Red Army at the end of the war, it was a forced march. The prisoners had inadequate clothing. They were barefoot. Oh, I should say before that, just towards the very end, he his fellow Terezín prisoners in Muselwitz begged him. They wanted to give him energy. They wanted to restore him, and they begged him to sing the Terezín march. They gathered bread, and bread was a precious commodity. They gathered a bread ration to give him energy, and wanted him to sing. They wanted him to sing the Terezín march, which apparently he was not able. This forced march, He couldn't keep up with the others. His friends led him into a field off the line of the march. They buried him in some hay, and they went on, died. He was 28 years old at the time. I mean, this old man was a very, very young man at the time. Um, so,
And yes,
yeah,
sorry, continue. If
no, you continue.
I just wanted to ask because you mentioned that the parallel between the Jews and the cyclists, but that reference must have been known to all. Even when I was growing up, it was a joke, but I'm not sure whether our audience knows what it meant, because there was between the wars, there was with the rising anti-Semitism, there was a joke about Jews and cyclists. So maybe if you can say just a few sentences about that, because it is very relevant to the play.
Absolutely, absolutely. And clearly, certainly, probably more than just the Czech Jews knew about it. My guess is the German Jews and others did. It was, as you said, it was between the wars. It was a joke that was prevalent among the Jewish community. It kind of went like this. The first person said, "The Jews and the cyclists are responsible for all of our misfortunes." The second person would say, "Why the cyclists?" To which the third person said, "Why the Jews?" And I used this at the beginning of the film. And it was let me see, where do I?
It kind of captures the absurdity of the whole and
No,
idiocy of this whole thing. So
of the whole prejudice against Jews. Because why, if somebody was saying an anti-Jewish thing, I had friends, all have friends also, whose mothers would say to them, "Oh, why the cyclists?" When somebody was saying an anti-Jewish something, it was code language. But also, and the cyclists, Um, it, the joke is told in a in by Hannah Arendt in one of her books. It's in Bertolt Brecht's play about Umberto Lee. It comes up over and over and over. And clearly it was very symbolic, very important, and certainly Schwenk knew it, and enough of the audience, or the prospective audience, since it didn't get to run. His other cabarets, his 5 or 6 other cabarets, had 30, 40, 50 performances, which he probably figured this would have too. So it was something that was known, and I thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk about it. And it it was he took the joke and he expanded it into the plot of an entire production.
and you mentioned that as well, but the importance of humor and actually another motive in the play, love, was really helping people to survive. So even though it seems a total contradiction, humor and laughter and a concentration camp, the play really captures everything about that and the importance. But I find the film very interesting in the way that it actually takes it. It's kind of the absurdity is squared, because there's another layer that you add on to the play with the film. So why when you actually reconstructed the play and you added some more modern elements versus some older elements, which is a sub question that I want to ask you. How did you decide what to leave out from Šedová's description? Because there must have been references to the context of the times, of the war times. And what did you add? And why did you decide to actually, once you had the play, to turn it into a film?
Okay, let me go backwards, because the answer about the film is really a very short answer. The subject of the play ultimately deals with prejudice, with bigotry, with bullying, with racism, and increasingly over the years since I first encountered the play or created the play based on it in 1995, and the little script, and then it was not until 29 or 2010 that I actually created a play. In these last 10 years or so, the whole subject has become much more troubling, much more prevalent, much more something that we need to pay attention to. And the play has been done largely in university settings, also in synagogues, by some community theater groups, but it seemed to us and to people who watched it, who heard it, and who spoke to us about it, that it should have a greater audience, it should have a broader, and that's why we determined to do it as a film. But to go back to your question about humor and laughter, in the camp, and I assume in other camps, Terezín was not the only place where people sang or told jokes or told stories. And they didn't want about, they knew what was happening to them. They knew they didn't have enough food. They knew they had too much work. They knew that they were in overcrowded conditions. They knew that there were the transports to somewhere. They had no idea where the transports were going, but they figured if it's bad enough here, if it's this bad here, surely it's going to be worse when they put us on those horrible looking cattle cars and send people away and the people back. They wanted entertainment. They wanted to take them out of themselves. They wanted to laugh. There were plays that were done. There were operas that were done. There were plays that were written in the camp. There was theater that came from people. Lots of people brought books with them. Even they had no idea where they'd be going or what their conditions would be, but they brought books. Some people brought the not that I don't mean printed plays. Nobody did anything that was a tragedy. It wasn't necessarily a comedy, but they were all. It was a light opera. It was light theater. It was nothing that was depressing. The only thing that might have been somewhat depressing, and ironically, it was the only production that was banned by the Council of Elders, was an opera called The Emperor of Atlantis, which talks about an evil emperor who's killing so many people that death goes on strike and says, I'm not going to kill anybody anymore. And that also was so obviously an allusion to the Nazis that the Council of Elders forbade it. But that's the closest, to the best of my knowledge, that anything came to something that was serious and troubling. You asked me also
the film. Why the film, and why how did you approach the topic? Because film and theater are two different genres. So how did you decide to make the film the way you did, and how did you find the director, and how was your creative process as the author or co-author or reinventor of the original play, and an approach of a stage and film director?
Okay. I was actually, my husband and I were the producers both of the stage play and of the film, and which meant that he got the pleasure of having to raise the money, and I got working with the cast and the director, as well as having rewritten. It's my play as much as it is there, somewhat Chedova's and definitely much of Švenk's plot. I was introduced to Edward Einhorn, who has done a great deal of work with Czech productions, with Václav Havel and Havel's stories and plays, and as a playwright and director on his own. And in I think it was 2012, Edward did a staged reading, Amy National Hall at the Czech consulate in New York, of Cyclist. And he and I decided together that we should take, it was sort of a trial run, so to speak, for doing a fully staged production, which we then did 3 years later. And in New York, it was a 3-week production. I'm sorry. In 2013, that I'm sorry, it was only a year later. In 2013, that Ed directed, and Edward and I had a very good relationship. I went to all of the rehearsals, and at first he was very nervous about having both the playwright and the producer at the rehearsals. But I was very gracious. I was very about, quietly telling him things that I might want to have changed or added or explained. And he gave me the opportunity to speak to the cast, to give them background. And by the time we finished that, we had a wonderful working relationship. And when Norman and I decided that we wanted to turn the play into a film, which actually it is a filmed version, it's a film of the play. We, for various reasons, the opening of the film, there was what's the word I'm trying to think of, a prologue, it's a play within a play within a play. So that the opening is Yana Shedova looking back, and in the film, she's a voiceover as we begin the play, and we see the film, and we see that the cat, one of the actors who plays Yana Shedova goes up the stairs into the attic where the rehearsal is going to take place, with her bicycle. And then there's a sped up thing of the other actors coming in, and we see them with their Jewish stars on, so that we know mates. And then it goes to and then there's a voiceover of Shedova giving a little bit of the background, and then it goes to the play within a play, which is my redoing of Karel Švenk's Cabaret. For the theater production, the play, the opening is first older Shedova looking back and remembering. And what she's remembering back to is talking about the night of the dress rehearsal. And she gives us some background. And then the actors come onto the stage, and they're complaining about being tired. They're complaining about all these people having no privacy, about the hard work, about their food rations, and then about where their family and friends have gone, about their being afraid of what's going to happen to them if they don't do what the Nazis want them to do, and the conditions. There's a kind of a joking thing about where Yana Shedova talks about wanting some perfume, and they say, "Oh, that we can give you, eau de Terezín, mingled odors of, garbage and bathroom odors and this and that and the other," and to give the audience a feel for what they should be expecting from the play. But we jumped further. We jumped into that more rapidly in the film because the film was already very long, and so the Hitler scene is so powerful to be really the beginning of the film. But the film basically is a filming of the play, which we used all but 2 of the actors from the staged production were in that. And as I say, Edward directed that, and I worked with him together, and we used the music that was written for the play version. And I guess I'm talking a lot. And Mark Podwall, who is a dear friend and a wonderful artist, did for us a whole opening segment of the bicycle going over the rooftops of noted famous buildings in Prague.
I love the touch with the famous Prague
But, right, it
Jewish
starts with
clock
the clock,
going
right?
backwards according to the Hebrew alphabet.
Goes the Hebrew direction, right, on the Jewish town hall, and then goes where it winds up kind of dying into Terezín. And we had a wonderful um, artist who did the animation for us, which I love with the animation. So
Sorry, I see that there are first questions because we promised that
all right, so
we will
let me
leave some minutes to questions from the audience. So let me ask this question.
okay. I might want to add one thing. Let's see what your question is.
Oh, it refers to the book that you showed at the beginning. If you can repeat the name of the book that you mentioned.
Yes,
That sparked the whole idea of making the play.
Absolutely. Terezín, 1941 to 1945. And it was published in, let me see, I think it was published in 1965 by the Council of Jewish Communities in the Czech lands. And I can send that to you if you want. Okay, but the other thing is,
yes.
We didn't get to comedy. Well, we get sort of to comedy, but the other question is, how is this a Holocaust play?
Right.
Since
that's what I wanted to ask you next, actually, right now. So
okay,
thank you so much.
Good. Well, it is. I mean, it's a Holocaust play because it takes place in Terezín, because it gives us a sense of the conditions in which they lived, because the allegory, and it is an allegory, which is the allegory, which is the joke, talks about, yeah, I blanked on myself. It's remembering, of course, that comedy was what they did. But of course, I needed the opening scene, and we didn't talk about the closing scene, which I really don't want to talk about if people have not seen the film. But
I had one question about that, because there are some elements that I particularly like, but I will fulfill your wish and not ask, but maybe I'll ask the audience to ask their questions. Now they can send them now, and in the meantime, can I ask you actually about I was quite interested in allow me to disclose one thing about the end of the film, and that's there are a few pictures or drawings at the very end of the film, which are original sketches from the camp. And so I wanted to ask, in the stage design and your whole idea about the play, how much of these sketches help you to design and envision the stage?
The costume designer and the designer sets were given by me many drawings and pictures from the camps, and they themselves looked up and sent to me additional pictures. It was very much in their heads when they put this together. And I should say, just this is an aside that really is somewhere else, but I really want to say it, which is that the crew, the cast, the musicians, the producers of the plays over the years got themselves so involved with the cyclist, with the story, with the events that happened with the Holocaust, that they did endless research over the weeks that they were doing their plays. They would call, they would talk to each other, they would send me emails, they would call me to say, is this true? How does this work? How can I put it in? They very much connected with it. And I can tell, one person said to me, when I complimented them on a performance, she said, I'm not doing this for me. I'm not doing this for you. I'm doing this for them. They identified with the actors, the Terezín actors, who had played the roles, and that was to me, that was extraordinarily powerful, as apparently it had become to them.
It is. And
So
there is a question actually that relates to it in a way, because it asks about the cast and a specific character in the play. Do you see Dr. Rat and the other people running the asylum as parallel to the German society that facilitated the Nazis? And would you consider this a one-act play, or does it have acts? Which is a very good question, actually.
okay, I presume in Schwenk's original, and certainly in Shedow's play, it was a two-act play. And for the first couple of years, it was a two-act play in my productions. But I decided that I was much happier having it flowed better for us to have it as a one-act play. My play has 20 short scenes. The scenes are interrupted or with punctuated with little squibs of music, which is what I was very, very happy with the composer who wrote the music for the play, and which is the music also for the film. The Rat is very much in the spirit of what I understood from Shedova's description of the original and from how Rat appears in her play. I don't know whether I would describe it as German society. I think that's probably not fair. There were many Germans who had nothing to do with Nazism. But he was the enabler. He was, just as Mr. Opportunist is a collaborator. They are definitely characters that come out of Nazi society in those years. I mean, I hope that answers.
Mm.
I
think it does. It's the opportunism there, the opportunist. I mean, it does answer the approach of many people to what was happening, and there might not have been initial hatred, but they used the opportunity to steal, use, and so on. You mentioned music. That score, which uses elements of Terezín music composed in Terezín, and new music. Can you tell us a little bit more? You said that you were very pleased with the composer that worked on it.
It's Stephen Feigenbaum who composed the music, the incidental music, as it is called, which is the overture and the short bit of music at the end, and the punctuations. Did his undergraduate and graduate work at Yale in music, and he came to us through the Terezín Music Foundation in Boston that Mark Ludwig is the director of. It created and is the director of, and they are focused on bringing. When he started, virtually nobody knew about Jewish music from the camp, and he created the opportunity. He himself is a musician and was a violist with the Boston Symphony. He created opportunities for the music to be recorded, produced, and to be played in various places. And he created this foundation. And I was able to, to take advantage of that and to use his, to use his finding of Stephen, who had already done some work for him. And Stephen knew some of the Czech music. He knew it's also some picks up a little bit of other music from Germany, and not only the Jewish music, but as you said, Czech music in general. And he did a wonderful job with it. And the little song for which I wrote the lyrics, that takes place on Horror Island, which takes the plot, the plot further of the Dear Red Cross guest, those little pieces of music are actually something that Švenk created, that was written down by a roommate of his in the camp. It's never been performed or published anywhere. And Mark Ludwig allowed us to use it for this purpose.
Thank
So
you. And there are two more questions. One of them is, we actually talked about it a little bit, but maybe we should make it clear regarding the communist regime and the fact that the play was changed to accommodate it. The question goes, one of the commentaries mentioned that the end of the play was changed to accommodate the communist regime. It was more the middle section, if I understand correctly, right? Or the end of both?
The end. It was both. It was pretty much the entire second act. I'd love to have the time to go into it, and if the person who asked the question is really interested, I'd be delighted, because it's quite fascinating. I mean, the rocket ship that appears in Švenk's original and in my production doesn't exist at all, or it's sort of the lunatics decide that the problem, since there's still trouble, people are still hungry and they don't have jobs and they're unhappy, the problem can't be the bicycle, it can't be the wheels of the bicycle, it must be the circle, and it must be the letter O. And there are 3 pages of dialogue which the letter O does not exist at all. So they speak gibberish for 3 pages of dialogue. I decided that was not particularly useful. And there's a throwaway line that they're going to send a rocket to kill the moon, to kill the sun. But Švenk's original, the rocket ship to the moon. So I went, at least according to Shedova. So I went back to that. In the second act, there is a lion that Obelisk encounters when he's run away and he's in hiding, and he's in the mountains in hiding, and they have a whole conversation, and Obelisk says to the lion, your story may be terrible, but my story is worse. And then the lion shows up in the zoo in the next cage. I realized after a couple of years of doing this that all of what they were talking about dealt with with the concerns of the communists and what they were trying to get across to the audience they were looking to bring in. At the very end, there is an explosion, and all the bad guys, all the lunatics are destroyed, and the Obelisk character gets a thing lands in his eye, and he says, "Oh, whatever." He said, "Why am I telling you this? For 4 years I was a prisoner, and now I want you to, and I'm telling you this story because I want you not to suffer the way I suffered." And then the cast sings the Communist Internationale. So that's how
clearly ideology being. There are 2 more questions. The first one is actually about the end, and the second one, I think, beautifully concludes what we have been talking about for the past hour. So I will ask you these 2 last questions, and the first one is about the ending being somewhat tragic and not happy. Is the ending your work, or was the original ending also tragic?
No, the original ending was not tragic. I told you now the 1961 ending, where he's giving this moral to the audience, and I'm quite sure that the 1944 ending was not tragic, because that would not have been done in the camp. But I needed to set this in the context of the concentration camp, and I wanted my audiences to understand what was happening, and that it was not a happy ending. There was, they were having the pleasure of it, but we know what happened. We know, just as we laugh. I should say that the when audiences come to watch the play, or I can't say about the film because I don't see them on watching the film, they start out being afraid to laugh. They start out, this is a thing about the Holocaust. It shouldn't be funny, but then they get involved in the slapstick and the back and forth, and all of the lunacy for which my actors have won a couple of best ensemble performance awards. And they begin to laugh and they begin to get into it to the point where the audience seems to forget, certainly of the play, seems to forget that this is being performed by actors who are themselves prisoners in a concentration camp. And so that when the ending comes, when the, when they've sung the Terezín march at the end and they've taken their bows, and somebody comes and gives Obelisk, or gives Švenk at that point, because they've already post the play, gives him a note and says, "Go back to your barracks. New transport list have been posted." The audience goes, "Ah!" And then, so they're basically prepared for that which comes afterwards as the conclusion.
And to conclude, there's the last question, and it goes as this: isn't the film and play more important as a Holocaust work because each were in danger of being completely lost, and its production stands, in the words of Elie Wiesel, as a witness to evil?
My answer will be yes, thank you.
I think that's the best.
Very hard. I worked very hard. It is my tribute to Karel Švenk and the wonderful things he did, and the wonderful way that he was able to keep up the morale of his fellow inmates, and the tragedy of his loss at such a young age, and of so many others who had so much promise, so much ability that they showed. All of the the people who are listening, the children whose lives were cut short before they even got to show their promise. Who knows what they might have contributed, which is also why this is an appropriate vehicle for International Holocaust Day.
Thank you so much, and thank you for all this work remembering these people.
Thank you. It was wonderful to have the film shown and to be able to share this with the audience. Thank you.
Thank you.